Let's talk about 5 ways to train volunteers in your church and in your ministry. Most of us, when you think of volunteer training, you probably think of one or two different ways that looked like. I remember being a volunteer in the church that I grew up attending, and when there was a volunteer training, which I don't remember many of those, but when there was one, especially for something specific like VBS or something like that, we did an upward sports camp. I remember that it was an event. It was a time you had to come, and we were going to do a training. It was going to last an hour, 2 hours, whatever the time was, and there was content presented from the front, and that's like how the training was done. That was one of the ways that we were trained. That is probably what most church leaders think of when you think of volunteer training. So, but we're going to talk about 5 ways you can do it, and not all of them are that class format, but that is where we're going to start. We're going to start with one of the key ways that we all were trained, or you have probably done training before, we get them together. But the important thing, I think, is to mix it up. So if you look at your calendar year or 12 months from now, whatever that is, can you mix up some of the training methods so that it's not just that same thing over and over again, and you'll catch different people with different ways that you train? So we'll start with the most common way, which is the large group setting where you're getting people to come. And I say large group, it might only be 10 people, but the idea is that it's a scheduled event. You're inviting them to it. It's a certain time, certain day, and we're gonna all be together. You might even break down into smaller groups at the training, but it's really a big, large group gathering to start. This is great because I don't want to downplay. This is a great method. It's why we've used it for so many years, right? It's great for community, for inspiration, for fun. Like there's so many things you can do there that you can't really accomplish if it was some of these other methods that we're going to talk about. So I think it's really important. The problem is if it's the only strategy we use, people will miss out. Comment below and let me know what percent of your volunteers show up on average to an in-person training. Is it 30%, 40%, 50%? I rarely hear anything north of 50, 60%. And I feel like it's only gotten worse over the last 5 years. Now, there's no doubt there's a correlation between higher commitment roles and higher frequency of attendance at a training. In the early days when our church was being started, our worship arts team, where the commitment was all pretty high, there were no roles there that were low commitment, and a lot of those folks had actually come to help start the church. I mean, so they were all in. They would probably get 80% attendance at a volunteer training. At the same time, our kids ministry was probably getting 60%, and our guest services and all that, where the commitment was a lot lower, you served less, it was an easier role to step into. I mean, it was probably 40%, something like that. And that was years ago, so I imagine those numbers would be even worse now. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that method. So let's mix it up and use some other ways as we're going to train volunteers. And the second way I'll talk about, probably the most underutilized. In fact, I don't even know if I could name a leader personally that I know who does this regularly, but that's a small group setting, to train volunteers in a small group setting. Now you might be thinking, okay, so maybe your church has small groups, mine does, and this means training in those small groups. It does not mean that. I'm not saying don't do that. That could be good, but most of our churches, if you have a small group model for discipleship, they're doing their own content. All of the people in a group aren't serving on the same teams. And so that'd be tough to do it in that setting. But what could it look like to have small group training where once a year there's, let's say it's 4 to 8 weeks of a small group meeting to train them. And that won't disrupt their schedule much, because imagine if your church is like mine and you have small groups for adults, and that's where they're doing that. If you're in a small group, you're going to your own small group every Tuesday night, during the year or during the school year or whatever. I don't think it's too much to ask to have a 4 to 8 week segment every year where volunteers in your ministry don't go to their own normal small group. They go to this other group just for 4 to 8 weeks for training. Or if it's a different night of the week, maybe you're asking them to go to 2 groups at the same time for 4 weeks. It's a big commitment, no doubt. I grew up, we went to church 3 times a week. So asking somebody to go 3 times a week just for 4 or 5 weeks doesn't seem like a huge stretch. And again, this is just different strategies we can throw at it. So it's not like it's a one size fits all. You test this out and see if it works. But what I love about the small group method is it's different than large group. You can do 4 to 6, 8 weeks of it. So even if somebody misses a week or two, they're still catching something. I also think better relationships can be formed. So there's lots of advantages to the small group method. And to pull it off, you just need to create a simple curriculum. And I'm using curriculum in quotes there because I don't mean like you have to go buy a curriculum or it has to be like really top notch curriculum in terms of training. All you're creating is really some content and a discussion guide. It doesn't even have to have content. I mean, let's give an example. Maybe this would help. Let's say I lead student ministry and I've done a large group training. We did that a few months ago. We're going to do a small group training option now. And I'm going to create this 4-week, let's say it's 5 weeks. I think in a previous video, I talked about using the Lead Small book. So what if you took the Lead Small book from the folks at Orange, which is one of the best books out there for training small group leaders, even for adults, but it's designed for kids and students. And there's 5 principles in that book. So what if you did 5 weeks? Everybody's getting the book. They're reading through the principles, reading a chapter a week and discussing it. I mean, that right there, you're not even creating much of that. You're just giving them the book. Now, there might be some other examples where it's not a book or it is a book, but it's too much for them to read, or you don't have to buy that, or you don't want them to have to buy it. And so you read it and you kind of create 5 discussion questions and a summary page with about each element, each chapter, each part of the book or whatever. And so that's what I mean by curriculum. Now, it could be that you get something like Lead Small and you just run with it. Lead Small even has videos that you can buy where people could watch that and read the book and talk about it. So that would be an example of like prepackaged, ready to go. But you might create something on your own, and maybe it's totally custom. It's like, I want our volunteers to know our mission, our vision, our strategy better, and I want to share with them 10 don'ts in our ministry, or 10 must-haves, or whatever it might be. And so you create a curriculum, for lack of a better term, and then you have them learn that in a small group format. I think it's underutilized. I would think about, and of course, a lot of times you're going to have to go ask whoever leads you if you could have permission to, ask volunteers to do this, because you don't want to just do it and interrupt people's small group rhythms. But it's worth asking. I think it'd be great to mix it up with a small group method. Another method that I think is probably the best. I mean, if we're just talking about what's best for a volunteer, it's one-on-one mentoring, because one-on-one mentoring is where they're going to get the most personalized help. Like that leader and that leader may both need to become better on stage, but that leader may need to work on transitions, and that leader may need to be more dynamic. Like they need to learn that when you're on the camera, it takes away so much energy. You need to add that energy back. What is it like you look 10 pounds heavier on camera? Well, you look much less engaging on camera than you do in person. So those are 2 very different needs that could be accomplished in one large training where we get them together and maybe we focus on a bunch of elements of what it means to lead from stage. But if you're doing one-on-one, you can say it to them. Hey, here's something I observed. Here's an area where I think you get better, and here are a couple ideas. The other thing about one-on-one mentoring is it's a chance to hear from them. See, a lot of times training, these methods that we're using, they're like megaphones. It's all the information, it's a one-way street. All the information's coming out this way. We're not hearing from them. And I think that's really, really important. So one-on-ones could be done in regular one-on-one meetings throughout the year. My recommendation is you build some kind of structure where every volunteer is met with at least once every 6 months. So if I'm volunteering in a guest services ministry, ideally somebody who leads me, doesn't have to be staff, is meeting with me once every 6 months. And that's an opportunity to invest in me, to hear how things are going for me, pray for me, and also help me get better, provide some training for me. So you as the leader don't have to do all those meetings. If you have 13 volunteers, I think you could do all of those one-on-one meetings. If you have 27 volunteers, I don't know, that's a lot. That's 54 meetings a year. That's a little more than 1 a week. Doable for sure, because you could stack them, and you're not doing 1 a week, you're doing 3 a week for 6 weeks and doing that a few times a year. But I think that's where you start to think about, how do I scale this? Can I get volunteers who lead other volunteers, and they're the ones meeting with their team once every 6 months, and I'm meeting with them once every 6 months? That is a concept we'll talk about more in other videos for sure, but I just wanted you to not think about it like, oh, I have to do all the meetings. I just think it's great if someone else can be in those meetings. Someone else can lead. They don't have to be with you, for sure. All right, let's talk about the most scalable way to train. And I feel like this is becoming more and more popular, but it certainly was underutilized 5 years ago. And that is online and on demand. I am very proud of our kids team and our student team at my church. And I can say this because I didn't have anything to do with it. They wanted to put some of the onboarding training, like when you start out as a volunteer, online, on demand. And so they did. And so some of the content, a lot of the content that you're going to get trained in as you start serving in our kids and student ministry is now online, and they watch it and then they come and talk about it when they're doing apprenticeship. And so, and we're going to talk about that as well. But I love that we've now put that online. Now, we've even done online training in other ways. Years ago, we did an online, basically a webinar for all of our kids ministry volunteers, and it was a lot of fun. We went into it thinking, I don't know what they expect here. Maybe we should have just got them together for kind of the large group training, you know what I mean? But it certainly was more convenient, easier to access for them. We started later, knowing that, hey, if you had young kids, you could get them in bed earlier. We had fun online, and we gave away some things, played some games, and it was a bigger picture training. So it was kind of one for everybody. But, you know, with Zoom and everything else, we could have done a big part all together and then broken out into Zoom rooms or something like that. There are so many different ways to train online. And so I think that's something we absolutely want to take advantage of. You can create videos, you can have them read articles, listen to some audio like a podcast or something like that, and train them digitally, and then put all of it in a central training hub that leaders can access. This can get like, I don't want to say complicated, but you can use something really good. Like at Ministry Boost, we use a platform called Kajabi. It's built for online courses. We do other things in it. If you become a member with us and get access to our courses and resources, you would see what that platform looks like. Well, Kajabi's not cheap. You know, we invested in that because, you know, we want the best for our leaders. We've got thousands of church leaders in there. It makes sense. If I was leading a volunteer ministry with 23 volunteers, I'm probably not using that. Instead, I might do YouTube videos like this, make them private, like where you can't, or unlisted, I guess it is, where, you know, you can't just find them, but then embed them on a password protected page of the website. Like you could do that. Now there are advantages and disadvantages. If you use a resource, there's a resource called Trained Up. That's what we use for our church. It's kind of like Kajabi, but it's built for church leaders. I do love that it keeps track of when they watch whatever they're supposed to watch. It also sends them automated email reminders. So if you haven't, in fact, I still get them because when I helped create some of that stuff, I enrolled in it. You know what I mean? Even though I obviously already knew the content. And, you know, I'll get emails every now and then saying, hey, you haven't finished this training. And that's great. That's great. So that might be the solution for you, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be totally free because you do something like YouTube and a password protected page on your website. But I think the key is if you use online digital options, whenever possible, hold people accountable for watching it. If it's just out there and it just sounds like, hey, you can do this if you want, how many people are going to do it? Not that many. Some, but not that many. So find a way to hold them accountable. That's why I love that our team put the onboarding content online, but they talk about it in their in-person conversations during apprenticeship, which is the next one we're going to talk about. The fifth way that you can train early on, especially, is through apprenticing leaders. This is absolutely one of the best ways, and it's because it combines that mentoring one-on-one idea that we talked about, which can be used anytime, should be used all the time, with getting them trained early on when they need it the most. One of the things I say, I don't know if it's true, it's hard to measure, but I say that you can train a volunteer to 80% of where they need to be in the first 1 to 2 months with a solid apprenticeship plan. And then the rest of the time they're with you, they're just growing from that 80% up, you know, to that 100%. But that can't happen unless you have a really solid onboarding training plan. And I think apprenticeship is part of that. So have new volunteers apprenticed by a veteran leader for 2 to 6 weeks, whatever that looks like. And the best way to do it, I think, is to create an apprenticeship checklist for every volunteer role. Like every volunteer role is different, but if you're going to be a small group leader in elementary, let's say, here's your apprenticeship checklist. You're responsible for it, and you're going to apprentice with this leader who already has been doing it for 3 years, for 4 weeks. And so every week when you come in, the checklist will say this week you should hit these 5 things. Week 2 you should hit these 6 things. Week 3 you should hit these 4 things. And then by the time you're done, you completed the whole checklist. It's a chance for you as the new volunteer can help drive it because it's their checklist. They're trying to get it checked off. They're the ones that can ask, hey, we haven't talked about where the curriculum is held yet. Can you help me understand that? We haven't talked about this item here that says, I don't know, how we communicate if we're going to have to miss or be out or something like that. Again, so like these are the small things that could be on the checklist. And this could be true of any ministry. Our small group ministry at my church for adult small groups, apprenticeship is longer. It's like a 6-month thing because the idea is we want you in the group with the leader for a good season, partly so you learn how to lead, also partly so we can gauge how good of a leader are you going to be. Are you going to be a fit for our culture? So it doesn't have to just be 2 to 6 weeks. I think in like kids ministry, student ministry, things like that, 2 to 6 weeks can be enough. We will talk about 4 serves. And the reason we say 4 serves is most of our volunteers serve every week, but we have some like large group roles where they serve once a month, but they do it during all the services. So if you only did 4 weeks, they'd only serve one time. So we'll say 4 serves. So for them, it's really 4 months, but for most people, it's 4 weeks. And here's where you consider using online, what we talked about, and in-person content during the apprenticeship. So think about, hey, watch that video online that week before you come. Then when you get here, let's talk about that. What did you learn from that? And I'm going to teach you in person through the apprenticeship how to use the curriculum. And then next week, watch this video, which talks about this. And then when we get in person, we're going to talk about a different concept, like in the room. Here's how the schedule works every week, that kind of thing. So I think if you can mix up online and in person, one, I think that's just generally a good principle for training across the board. But certainly during the apprenticeship period, I think that can be really, really helpful. Which training methods, I just listed 5, maybe there's more that I'm not thinking about. Which training methods do you currently use? And then watch the year-long strategy video, which will be linked at the end here. You can click that to see. Watch that and then include these 5 different ways that you can train in your plan. Don't just stick to one method. Use a few different methods so that you can mix it up. It gets old and it gets stale if we just keep doing the same old thing over and over again. If you need more help with volunteer training, recruiting, developing leaders, check out ministryboost.org, where you have a membership. You can access all of our resources. It's kind of like Netflix for church leaders. And if you need some help, you'll find some resources there that will help with that, including a course on developing a year-long training strategy. But certainly watch that video so that you can create your plan to train volunteers all year long and make sure you're mixing it up so it's not just one type of training.